Hey guys, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. This is your host Tom Syree from On the Hot Podcast. Today I have some bonus content for you guys. However, the bonus content will not be about anything in the world of sports. It will be mainly about this podcast because today is 365 of On the Hot Podcast. This is the milestone, our first year milestone of the podcast. So today I'll be sharing my thoughts of On the Hop '06, the podcast so far, what's next for the podcast, and how I feel about the podcast moving forward. So we have honestly came a long way in the last 365 days of obviously a whole bunch of segments, so many hours put into the podcast. But if you guys go all the way back to our Instagram account and go back and check out our first episode, unfortunately it's not on Apple Podcasts, but if you guys go on our Instagram page, go all the way to the first episode that was done by myself, my co-hosts Robert Sarasulo, Curtis Green, and Davon Carroll. Go back and watch how far we really have came in this podcast. The first episode is the episode that has the most views, which is 525 views. That is the most that we have ever done in an episode, and what a way to have the most views with your first episode that was ever done. So I still think that's one of the best highlights of this podcast so far. Again, first episode, total views over the last 365 days have been a total of 525 views. That's really great for the podcast. So let's get into it. How was the podcast started? So my inner circle, my family members, my friends have always known I've always loved sports, whether I've been playing sports, whether always been watching sports, whether I've always following sports, watching sports commentators, watching sports analysts. I've always loved sports. It lives in my DNA, if you want to be honest. So how the podcast started, I've always had a group chat, and these guys watching and listening know who they are. I've always had I've always had a group chat with these guys. I always talked about sports. I always discussed whether it's NBA, football, any sport, baseball, you name it. We've always debated about which player is good, which team is good, which player is not. We always debate during the games and text each other what's going on. So I always think if we're so good about texting each other, talking to each other all the time about sports and know the game more than a lot of people do, why not bet on ourselves and make a podcast? So obviously I had more than 6 guys wanting to do the podcast. I started a group chat with the guys that I trusted the most to begin the podcast with, and we went ahead and started a podcast because we already knew everything there is to know in the world of sports. We know sports in the back of our heads, and why not talk about it and see where it goes from here? Obviously I think we're off to a good start, but I want to give these guys a shout out. The guys I selected and the guys I've rolled with since day one, since starting this podcast, and that's all the co-hosts. Honorable mention to a guy that I actually did start off with, that started off the podcast with us. Obviously, he's not doing it anymore, but shout out to our guy Jordan Dalton, who was one of the original co-hosts during this podcast. He knows sports in the back of his head. He's no longer with us, but he's an honorable mention because he was the original 6 that started off this podcast. But shout out to all my co-hosts, Robert Sarasulo, Curtis Green, Davon Carroll, Mitri Jones, and Cameron Soto. All 5 of those guys have been amazing co-hosts so far, and your host, Thomas Tyree, obviously. But I got to get on them real quick. I know you guys have been following and listening for the last couple of weeks. I have been carrying the load. I have been carrying the team on our back. These guys, when they watch us, will obviously laugh about it a little bit, but we got to hold these guys accountable. They got to get back to doing what we do best, all as a group. We're better as a group than obviously by myself, solo-wise. So we all got it. When we are all on our game, I think that's when we produce our best content on the podcast. So those 5 guys, I'm calling you guys out. We got to get back to work as a cohesive unit because I've been carrying the podcast on my back. But anyway, shout out to all the guests that I had over the last 365 days on the podcast. The guests watching and listening, you guys know who you are. You guys have contributed in a big way to this podcast, and you guys also deserve a lot of credit who came on as a guest, because you guys have came on as guests and delivered, honestly, some of the best segments that I have had there in this podcast history during the year. So those guys coming on as guests, you guys know who you are, and I thank you guys for coming on as guests as well during this podcast. and we've had some great times. And I just shout out the guests. I should also shout out the guys that were a part of the first ever On the Hop podcast, Fantasy Football, which we will be bringing back again this fall when football returns. We'll probably do another another fantasy draft, I should say, once again. But thank you guys for those guys who participated in it. Obviously, Rob Sarasulo became the first ever On the Hop winner, fantasy football. But it's like going through this podcast. It's like I never did drugs, but if I did do drugs, I would know the addiction of being addicted to something. I am truly addicted to this podcast. Like I said, I believe sports runs in my DNA. I do believe that I have a growing passion for every single week to do this. I've done this for consecutive, nonstop, honestly, 52 weeks in a row. I have somehow, some way done this podcast. I don't care what I'm doing. I could be on the planet Mars. I could be anywhere. I have done this for 52 weeks straight without no complaints, no hesitations, whether I do it with my guys, whether I got to do it alone. That's how much I love sports. That's how much I love doing this. And it's been an outlet for things that I've gone through, whether it's been good days, whether it's been bad days in my life, whether it's been problems that I'm going through. The podcast has always been an outlet, though, and I've been really addicted to doing this since day one. 52 straight weeks, you can't complain about it. I've honestly done this on vacation. I've honestly done this when I do have my free time. I've done this on a cruise. I've done this being in mansions on vacation. So you can't outwork me, in my opinion, as a podcaster. I don't have the numbers to show yet. I have this population that you guys have supported me so far, but you can't outwork me. My work ethic when it comes to this is untouchable. 52 straight weeks. I don't see anybody doing that. I'm very confident in myself. I hold myself accountable. I think I'm my biggest critic. When I do record videos like I am doing today, obviously this is a one-time video record, but I've gone back countless times over and over and over again because I'm my biggest critic. If I make one mistake, I go back, record another 10 to 15 minute segment like I didn't even do it with no hesitation. I put in the work. I'm very confident in myself. I do believe that I am the best person that there is on the planet where there is talking about sports, and I have a long way to go when I say that. But if you don't believe if you don't believe that you're the best at what you do, on whatever you do in life, then I don't believe you have any business doing it whatsoever. I honestly have a long way to go as a podcaster. We'll see how this grows, and we'll see what I could become if I do become a sports analyst one day. But I really do believe how confident I am in myself. I do believe I can hang in there with the Shannon Sharps of the world, the Stephen A's of the world, the Skip Baylesses of the world, the Mad Dogs of the world, the Max Kellermans of the world, the Kendrick Perkins of the world, the JJ Reddicks of the world. I can keep going on and on and on. I really believe whether it's football, basketball, baseball, you name the sport, I really do believe I can go toe-to-toe with these guys. Am I on their level? Hell no, but I got a long way to go, and I really do think I can be in a debatable conversation with these guys and go toe-to-toe and hold my own and even win debatable battles between these guys. That's how confident I am by myself. I think it's important, regardless of you guys, whether you guys are chasing a dream, whether you guys are chasing something that you never thought you would. Obviously, this is something that I bet on myself doing for the last 365 days. Like I said, if you don't believe that what you're doing, if you don't believe that you're the best at what you do, and you have a strong passion for it and something you're committed to on a daily basis, I just don't believe you have no business doing it at all. And that's how I feel about when I do this podcast. And that's honestly not being a cocky person. My inner circle, my friends, my family members know I'm the most humble human being on this planet. But when it comes to this, you have to have confidence. You have to believe in yourself. And if you don't believe in yourself, then nobody else will. So that's how I feel about that. Overall grade, I would give this podcast year one, I would say B minus. I think there's a lot of things that I have to fix myself as a host. I think there's a lot of things that my co-hosts have to work on as themselves. I think there's a lot of things that I could do differently. I think there's a lot of things I could do marketing-wise differently to gain more of a population, gain more of an audience, so we could keep doing this for just more than year 2, year 3, year 4, etc. However long this goes on for. The future is bright, I believe. But overall, I give this a B minus, a great start. Like I said, a lot of great things that I have done, a lot of great segments that I have spit into this microphone and said, a lot of truth, a lot of things that I have said great so far. So I give it a B minus. I'm looking to improve myself in year 2. Obviously, we have 4 platforms right now. We have Apple Podcasts, we have our Instagram account, our Facebook account, and our YouTube account. But I'm looking to add a 5th dimension onto that. I'm looking to improve and gain more momentum, gain more of an audience as much as I can. So in year 5, I'm announcing right now that I'm actually going to do those 4, obviously be more heavy on YouTube, but I'm going to introduce Spotify, because how fair is it that we have an Apple podcast, an Apple audience, but Spotify listeners don't get the opportunity to have it? I think having a Spotify account as well as an Apple account will bring in more of an audience and improve our numbers and improve a listening audience and a watching audience as well. But that is all the time I have for you guys. I couldn't thank you guys enough for supporting for the last 365 days of On the Hop 06. It's been quite a journey. Again, I thank the 5 co-hosts that have done this with me. Robert Sarasulo, Curtis Green, Davon Carroll, Michi Jones, and Cameron Soto. I thank them for devoting their time, their dedication, and their efforts into this podcast and all our busy lives. Whether it's work, school, you name it, we've all put in work to do this throughout our busy life. So I couldn't thank those 5 guys enough. I couldn't thank all the guests that have came on this podcast enough. And I couldn't thank all you guys for supporting more. But year 2, we're going to take a big leap. I believe in myself, and I'm always going to better myself. And like I said on the first episode, 365 days, when I was ending the podcast, it's only up from here. And I still believe in those words. But that is all the time I have for you guys. This is your host, Thomas Tyree, signing off. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for listening. And year 2 will be coming as soon as next week.